As the introduction said, my name is Tana, and I'm here to talk today about our tribal salmon camp, which I've been up last night reading applications for this current summer. So go ahead and start. So the mission of the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission is to ensure a unified voice in the overall management of fishery resources, and as managers to protect reserved treaty rights through the exercise of the inherent sovereign powers of the tribes. So CRIPFRIC is a rather large organization. It's made up of 4 tribes that have treaty rights along the Columbia River. So we have the Yakima Nation in Washington State, Nez Perce tribe in Idaho, and then the Umatilla and the Warm Springs tribes in Oregon. One of the goals of CRIPFRIC is to increase capacity of tribal members to work within natural resources career paths. And in looking at our own workforce, as well as the staff at each of the member tribes within natural resources, we've noticed that a lot of the staff who are in management positions or in professional, like biologist positions and stuff, tend to be non-tribal staff. A lot of those positions are going to be retiring soon, and so our goal is to create a pathway for tribal members to step into those positions and be qualified and ready to do those. So our workforce development program is created to kind of create opportunities to sustain a tribal workforce and create opportunities to have skilled tribal members who are scientists and technicians that serve the tribe's salmon and natural resource management program needs. The mission of the program is to build and foster pathways for Native American students from elementary school all the way through postgraduate levels to achieve the skills, education, and training necessary to succeed in the tribe's fisheries and natural resource positions. So the program is pretty multifaceted. We're blending traditional ecological knowledge with Western science. We have many different approaches that we use. We have internship opportunities for college students at the undergraduate level right now. We're doing summer programming with middle school students right now as well, and then we're exploring opportunities to expand that to include high school programming, graduate students, and professional staff. So this is just kind of a map to kind of center you and show you where our tribes are located. So again, all of the nations are represented there. You can see their areas of influence along the Columbia River Basin. So we're covering 3 states. So the pictures and everything that I'm showing in this one are from last year's salmon camp. It is a pre-college program that supports out-of-school learning opportunities. We accept 20 students into the program every year, and then we break it down by accepting 5 students per member tribe. Also, each year, a different tribe takes turns hosting it. So depending on the student, they may be a host or they may be a guest in a tribal community. So the program focuses on providing culturally relevant STEM experiences to improve student achievement and close the achievement gap for Native American youth. So our key components and values are that this is an out-of-school learning experience. So we want the students to not just be sitting in a classroom listening to lectures, but to really be hands-on and be able to ask questions, be very interactive. Experiential STEM experiences, so like I said, very hands-on. They do a lot of different types of activities. Our program is focused on salmon, lamprey. We also focus a lot on first foods, so getting them out into culturally significant locations where they can ask questions with tribal experts. It is intergenerational. We incorporate 6 non-tribal staff, so we bring in elders and community leaders to come in and talk about history, about language, cultural demonstrations, and things like that. We want to make sure that the program is culturally relevant. Our students share very similar stories in addition to the treaty rights. So it's always interesting to see the youth kind of make those connections and like, oh, you guys do this, or oh, you have this word, and it's very similar to the word that we use for that, because the cultures are also very closely related. It's very future-oriented, so we want our youth to start thinking about their future and making a plan for themselves. That's even incorporated into our application process. They have 3 questions that they have to answer in an essay format for the application. The first one is, just a general question like introduce yourself and tell us why you're interested in coming to salmon camp. The second question is for them to explain what they're interested in, what their hobbies are, their extracurricular activities, and why they're excited about those types of topics. And then the last question is, what do they want to be when they grow up? And they're a lot of fun to read, and it can be very competitive. Last year we had 40 applicants and we could only take 20. So we kind of have a little scoring rubric where we go through and assign points. Some of the things that I look for in our applicants are that there's some sort of an interest in learning about salmon culture, that they have an affinity for being outside, being outdoors. If they have experience with camping and fishing, that's always a good plus. In terms of their favorite classes and stuff, we like to see science and math in there if we can. Although we've had students who are like, I want to be an actress when I grow up, or I want to be I want to play for the Dallas Cowboys and stuff. But what I'm looking for, like in terms of their future, is that they have a plan. So it's not just, I want to do this, but I've had students write, I don't really know what I want to be when I grow up. I'm only in middle school, but I know I want to go to college. So that they're thinking about a path for themselves. We incorporate reciprocity into our program as well. So we try to have some sort of service learning component where they're helping out within the community that they're in. And lastly, we want to make sure it's fun. So I'm going to go through some of the different topics that we cover throughout the camp. The first one is field studies. So last year, we brought in a staff member from Oregon State University who did presentations, as well as Yakima Nation fisheries staff. So they got to learn about salmonid ecology and fish habitat. They got to go out into the field and do fish surveys and electrofishing, which was really exciting. They had lots of questions like, are the fish getting hurt? And they got to go collect them and look at them after that. We also did a lot of lessons on Pacific lamprey. They tend to be a fish that are forgotten, and a lot of people have misconceptions about them, or like they look at them and they're like, ew, or a lot of families are not necessarily eating them as often, so youth are less familiar with them. So we had some of the Yakima Nation fisheries staff come out, and they had little samples, or like little decoys of lamprey, because they have no bones and stuff, so they got to kind of bend it around and look at it. They also got to do aquatic macroinvertebrates, so they had to go out into the streams and look for different organisms. We broke the groups up too, so we also do a 50-50 split between boys and girls. So we kind of broke up the groups, and the boys did not catch as many organisms because they were very interested in swimming. But the girls found a snake. They found a water snake. They found a lot of crawdads, a couple of little minnows, and lots of little periwinkles and bugs and everything. So they were able to identify that stream as a healthy water system. We also had a staff member from fisheries come in and do a watershed model, which was really fun because she had fabric. So it was like all boxes and fabric, and it was just kind of this huge model that we had in this room where they got to look at what a water system looks like. So they had the mountains, and they could see like timber harvesting and stuff happening, and then they could see the farmlands and everything, and then a town and the city and how water is treated and stuff. And so all of the things that they might be able to do to help create a healthy water system. And then lastly, we did a whole section on ethnobotany and first foods. So we had some tribal elders come out, and we were able to go huckleberry picking, as well as identify different roots and plants up on the Yakima Nation. Another thing to mention about last year's camp is that our camp was held at Camp Chaparral, which is in the closed area of the Yakima Nation. And so we had to get permission for all of our non-tribal staff and our non-tribal, non-Yakima tribal member youth to participate and to have access to that site. And so we made sure that all of our youth knew that, you know, they were most definitely guests in that space, and to appreciate it because they may never have the opportunity to go back to that space again. So this is a picture of Guillermo. He is the staff member from Oregon State University. So he was doing the salmonid ecology lecture and stuff before they went down to the stream. And then they got to look at the various stages of the salmon egg hatching. This is the electrofishing. This is our lamprey presentation, and I believe that the staff member holding the sheet that says Asum, she is actually a student as well. So it was really nice to have a somebody who is going to college talk to the youth as well. And every time we had a staff member or a presenter come in, I always ask them to share a little bit about their career path and their educational background, so that the youth can kind of make connections to how did somebody get this type of job. And this is the youth doing the macroinvertebrate exercise. That is the watershed display. So you can see the blue sheet is the stream or the river, and then back where she's standing is like where the mountains are, and then it goes into like the farmland and everything. So another section that was really important for us was making those cultural connections. In the past, our salmon camp has been partnered with outside organizations, and it tended to leave out some of those cultural connections. And so that's one of the things we really wanted to address once the camp became solely Cryptfrix salmon camp. So we have tribal presentations by elders and cultural experts. So the presentations that we had were on first foods and how to identify them. Had a lot of lessons on Tamainuit, which is natural law, and they had a lot of presentations from tribal elders who reinforced it, and then they were able to apply that in some of the lessons they learned about the fish. Language was also incorporated. They were able to learn the words for the Columbia River, for different mountains, as well as different foods. Stories were shared every single evening with tribal elders. And then they also got to ask lots of questions about their history and their treaty rights, because they all have the same treaty rights along the river. And so just making sure that they all kind of understood the struggles and the fights that led up to the rights that they have today, and the importance of them making sure that they can still exercise their treaty rights. We were really lucky at Camp Chaparral that they had a sweat lodge available for our youth to use, and so we had community members lead sweat for the boys and for the girls. And we did that on the Wednesday night of camp. So our camp starts on Monday and it goes through Friday. So it's like a half day on Monday and a half day on Friday. But on Wednesday night, we had a sweat lodge after dinner, and the girls went first. They did 3 rounds. My feet were still cold, but they did really good. And I heard the boys did 4 or 5 rounds, and they wanted to go again the next day. So they kept asking, can we do another sweat and everything? And unfortunately, we didn't have time in our schedule to bring it in every single evening, because Thursday night we do a traditional dinner, and so we have we're hosting a lot of guests that night, and so we didn't have time to do a ceremony that night. And then the traditional dinner, some of our youth are designated food gatherers for their longhouses and servers, so they were able to help teach some of the other youth who weren't familiar with a lot of those traditions. But we had worked with a staff member from the Umatilla Nation who does a lot of presentations on first foods and stuff, so she was able to help prepare them so they knew how to go out and set the food out properly. And then we had some community members who sang songs and gave the blessing. We also invite community members and family to come up to the camp and share in that meal. So this is just a slide to show the first foods. So of course water is central because that is the source of all life. The students were able to pick berries. The huckleberries were ready. We also had some little strawberries that were ready too, so they got to snack on some of those as they were picking the huckleberries. The salmon obviously is very important to the Columbia River tribes. It's the first food that gave its life to the people to sustain them. Wild game, we had some deer meat donated from the community for our traditional dinner, so all of the first foods were present. And then roots. They weren't able to dig roots at this camp last year, but this year they'll be going out to dig some roots because we'll be in Nez Perce territory and we'll be up higher in the mountains, so the roots will be ready when we go next month. So these are some slides that just kind of show different fish that are culturally important to the tribes. The picture with the young boy, he's holding lamprey right there, and then we have salmon and we have sturgeon, and those are all present in the Columbia River. So these are some pictures from our camp. That is Eleanor Davis, and she is an elder from the Yakima Nation, and she came in and she's well known for knowing plants. And so she came in and she did a couple of different presentations with our youth talking about plants, but she also worked with a lot of the alcohol and drug rehabilitation. And so she talked a lot about taking care of yourself and your spirit and everything and keeping healthy. And so that's kind of a picture where she's showing a student to how to keep healthy and how to stay clean. And she was also really great in providing some papers that have diagrams of your body and like the words for all of your body parts and everything too. So she was a really great addition to our camp. And these are some pictures of the youth sitting around the campfire in the afternoon. We did a lot of presentations and stuff there on the camp when we weren't out in the field. And again, we have more tribal members sharing stories and history. And here they are out in the field. This is when they were identifying different plants and learning what their uses were of them. And this was more cultural sharing in the evening. They actually got to learn a lot about some of the history of formal education within tribal communities and stuff too. So, you know, there's a long history with our tribal communities being forced into education systems that were focused on assimilation, and so that was talked about and shared by some of our elders. And then giving back. Reciprocity is a big value that we have, and we try to incorporate that into our camp. During camp, they all help on the Thursday before the traditional dinner, so they help to prepare the meal, and then they also help with serving and cleaning up. After the camp, one of our components is going back to each of the tribal communities and having them do a presentation and sharing the knowledge that they learned. So while they're at camp, they do a poster. So this is kind of an opportunity for them to share and reflect on what they're learning while they're at camp, and also to be a little creative. So we get these big poster boards, and they have lots of markers, and there's stickers and stuff too. So they are, we divide it up into kind of 3 areas. So on the outside, they start there and kind of draw or write out things that they know about salmon and about their culture and stuff before they get to camp. And so they work on that. And then as camp progresses, there's another inner ring, and then they start writing down new knowledge, new information that they've been learning while they've been at camp. And then in the middle, at the end of camp, they kind of write a little synopsis of the camp so that they can share that after camp is over. So about a month later, I go on this little whirlwind tour and drive to each of the communities, and we host a pizza party. We invite the families to come, and I try to keep it low-key, because remember, they're 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, and public speaking can be very intimidating at that age. So I try to keep it really low-key. I have gotten some feedback like, oh, maybe we should invite our commissioners and some of the tribal staff and some of the teachers and everything, but then I think it's just going to get really big. But we do try to hold it in a conference room if possible, just to kind of get them used to being in a formal setting and doing presentations. And it's a lot of fun. It's really cute. So I have some pictures I'll share of that. So this is the huckleberry picking when they were out, and that was really nice because they got to they picked a lot of huckleberries, and they were able to share that during the traditional dinner. And here they are preparing to serve the food. These are journals, so they are given journals to keep track of the lectures and the different things that they learn while they're at camp, and they learn how to take field notes. And then these are some of the examples of the poster boards that they do. So you can see they are all very different in how they decide how they want to share that information. Let's see. These are some of the presentations from Nez So we were going to do it in their community center, but they were redoing their floor. So we ended up just doing it in the park, and it worked great. So at the end of their presentation, they are also given a check for $100. And this is really nice because it comes in right before school starts. So they have kind of ideas of how they want to spend that. But we want to show them that it's important to share information that you learn. So, you know, when you go to school, when you go to college and stuff, you're going to learn new things. And it's important that you're able to share that back with your community. So these are some more pictures of their presentations. I've noticed that there are some tribes that you can kind of tell that the youth are very prepared, and they've been doing oral presentations regularly. And then you have other tribes, or maybe it's just the students that we had, but there were some who it felt like doing presentations was something they were expected to do on a regular basis. And other tribes where, like, you know, I had this one student, he had just finished 5th grade, so he was going to go into 6th grade, and he was so scared and nervous, and he's like, no, I don't want to do it, I don't want to do it. And so I kind of coached them all beforehand, and I just like, you know, just introduce yourself, say who you are, what grade you're going into, what school you're going to, and then tell them what we did at salmon camp. You know, just leave it at that. And I said, and if you forget or if you run out of things to say, just say, does anybody have any questions? And it took a lot of the stress off of them. And everybody had questions for them. And a lot of it is like, what's your favorite thing, or what do you want to do when you grow up, and everything. But swimming is definitely at the top of the list. We know that's something we have to keep every year. So we do surveys with our youth. At the beginning of camp, we do kind of a pre-assessment survey to kind of gauge their knowledge on the salmon life cycle, in terms of their interest in going to college, if they're interested in math and science. And then we also do a survey at the end of camp. So what we found out from last year's group of students was that salmon camp met all of their expectations. So that made us happy, 100%. 95% of our salmon campers said that their interest or confidence in science had increased. 90% of our campers are interested in STEM-related subjects, and 75% of them say that they are definitely going to college. And we did have some students who said that they were considering the military as an option as well. And so, you know, we had explored lots of different opportunities for them post-graduation. Some quotes that we have from our campers from last year said, "Salmon Camp has taught me a lot about my culture and how I want to be a big part of it. It was awesome and I want to learn more. I want to be a biologist even more now. Now I know how important fish and lamprey are, and now I want to help them as much as I can." And this is my favorite one. It says, "My favorite part was making friends with other tribes and learning new things." And that's one of the great things about our camp, is that it is an intertribal camp. So a lot of our youth, we're taking 5 from each of our member tribes. Some of them are related to one another and didn't know that they were cousins. And so then they start introducing themselves and learning who their families are. They're like, "Oh my gosh, you're related to them too." So that was a lot of fun to see that interaction. We're like, okay, that's right, it's your cousin. So we really couldn't do our camp without our partnerships. And so our member tribes are the heart and soul of our salmon camp. Because we take turns each year hosting it in a different community, we rely so heavily on the fisheries and natural resources staff from each of the tribes, whoever's hosting that year. So for example, this year with Nez Perce, because we're in a completely different location, we have access to different things. So this year's camp, we'll actually be going on a jet boat tour on the Hells Canyon, and we'll be bringing tribal elders and staff to come along with us to share projects that are happening along the river, and then also to look at cultural sites and talk about the significance of those places. We get a lot of our funding from the BIA through the Tribal Youth Initiative program. We've also received funding from First Nations Development Institute through their Native Youth and Culture Fund. Last year's camp, we also had funding from NOAA Fisheries, from the PCSRF. And then we have really strong partnerships with different colleges and universities. And this is just a small sampling because we used Oregon State University last year to come in and do some presentations. But with being in Nez Perce territory, University of Idaho is like super central. And as an organization, we have probably the longest relationship with U of I because we have a genetics research lab with them. And University of Washington has also participated and come in on a college day to share and talk about educational opportunities. So these are probably some of the top fisheries programs in the country also. So it's really nice that we have staff who are able to come out and talk about fisheries as a career path with our youth. So that's kind of the formal part of my presentation. So tribal elders taught us that if we take care of the first foods, that the first foods will take care of us. And that is a picture from, I think, over at Celilo when they did one of the ceremonies over there. But that is everything that I have. This is my contact information. And I did bring a couple of handouts. I don't have enough for everybody, but this is the flyer that we used for this year's camp, and that was sent out to each of the tribal communities to get applicants. And then I have a couple of copies of the application that we use, and this was kind of a write-up of last year's salmon camp, so it's a little brochure. So I have those if anybody is interested in taking them. Any questions?
We should have been keeping this. Don Motanic with ITC. What you have 20 students, so what is the cost for the camp?
So when I look at, if I don't include like my staff salary, like my personal salary, but just like the hard cost of the camp, it's around $20,000, and that's for renting the space, That's for we do 4 counselors. We do 2 male, 2 female counselors. We pay for a cook. We help with transportation for each of the 4 communities. And sometimes we're really fortunate in that our member tribes will actually provide that transportation. So that changes year to year. And then we pay for the food. We pay for like little extra things. So like the jet boat for this year will be another separate contract that we do. And we're also doing backpacks and water bottles this year to help eliminate waste, so that we're not having plastic water bottles and stuff, so that they're always going to be hydrated. We don't allow sugary drinks and stuff at camp, so they'll always have a water bottle. So I can fill it up. I think the other expenses is but it comes down to about $20,000. Yeah.
How'd you get started?
How did we get started? So Criprick had this camp going. It was kind of a partnership over a long period of time. I think it started, in the mid-90s, 95, I think was the first year that they did it. Was it?
I could answer that. Actually, Salmon Camp, Dave Hatch, who's a tribal councilman at Siletz, his background is actually civil engineering. He's a civil engineer with the city of Portland, traffic engineer, coordinating the traffic of the MAX train and the traffic lights, and part of the American Indian Science and Engineering Society. Dave Hatch worked with the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry to get a grant started, and they actually, back 20 years ago, my daughter was on it, they started at Siletz, and they followed the path of the salmon. They went from the ocean up the Columbia River, and then all the way up to the mountains where the Warm Springs at that tribe was a host tribe. And Payumshwa, their celebration was the final, and they would make presentations during that. That was kind of the origin of it, and then when lost funding, and then OMSI kind of mentioned that it got away from the culture part, and when it got to OMSI, it started to get more of just science was kind of what went on, and I think that's when Warm Springs and the Columbia River tribes, who had participated with Dave Siletz and Grand Ron was also one of the tribes. So Siletz, Grand Ron, and the Columbia River tribes were involved. And when Columbia River, the Fish Commission decided, well, let's do a better job, and then plus with the BIA funding, I think that's what triggered helping, and then all the other universities started helping. So that's the origin. So it's gone over time, and part of it was with the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, where Dave Hatch, Siletz tribal members, was one of the founding members of the chapter.
Yeah, so this year we'll be completing our first circle, so each tribe will have been a host in its current setup, with the member tribes hosting the camps. There are some drawbacks to that, especially because our headquarters are in Portland. When word gets out that Salmon Camp is happening, I get a lot of inquiries from other tribes and wanting to participate. And because the member tribes are the ones who are hosting it and funding it, and the curriculum is developed based around the member tribes, our students get top priority. So if we ever have availability where there's not enough applicants and stuff, then we would gladly consider other tribal students, but so far that's not been the case.
I can't imagine how difficult it is to only pick 20 students. But do you try to keep an equal number of male and female?
Absolutely, we have to, because of our sleeping arrangements and because of our counseling staff. So I actually have a very equal number of applicants so far. So that's been kind of a nice thing to see. Although we did have some tribes where it would be like 4 girls and 1 boy, and 4 boys and 1 girl, and then others that were kind of more evenly split. But so far it hasn't been too big of a problem.
I wanted to ask one more. So sure. You mentioned that you do the surveys, the before and after surveys. You also do you get some feedback from the students on the curriculum?
Yes. Yeah, and then we also do a survey for the families at the wrap-up event. So we want to hear from the parents and the family members as to whether or not they observed a change or new knowledge learned from their student. And one of the things that we learned from last year's survey was a lot of the families were saying that they want to see a high school program. And I am in complete agreement because we had a lot of students who were 8th graders last year who are too old to participate in Salmon Camp this year. So that's kind of my next step, is looking and exploring funding opportunities to get a high school program started.
Do you do any alumni tracking? Do you have a sense of how they do in high school compared to the general public? Something's been long enough that some of those students have gone on to college, or do you have any?
The ones who've been through our salmon camp are not old enough to be in college just yet. I think 12th grader would be like the oldest who's gone through the camp so far. But we do have like all of their names and contact information. We haven't really done any thorough assessment in terms of like where they're going quite yet, but we do have their names and contact information, so that could be something we do down the road.
Questions? I'd like to note, I just know, or Larry helped us realize that Victoria's name's not on the evaluation, so if you could please write down, she's on the program. And then also mention that originally Sally Cockrell Sally Williams from the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society wasn't able to make the session today, so thankfully Tana stepped up and really appreciated it. And plus they do a lot of work to participate with the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society. We had a lot of good questions. I think Tana could hear kind of the end, a lot of similar questions that Victoria was addressing. And I guess one of the things as we go through these sections is developing recommendations for ITC to look at and ask the Bureau, asking about feedback, like the alumni question was a good one, of monitoring, because reporting back, they mentioned the importance of having the be able to report back the presentations that we've heard today would be something that I think Congress would love to hear, to see that. But looking at recommendations for like the things that we heard maybe for the first, almost like a lot of questions were like a youth camp manual, and each tribe has a little, like you mentioned with Yakima, because it's a closed reservation in the forest land, that there would be some, like a supplement would be needed for Yakima. But there is a Native Youth Camp manual through the Hopewell Mountain Foundation, the Native Science in University of Montana. That it's kind of a broad overview of youth camps, but it does have like critical things, like when you're talking about the chaperones, you're talking about, say, background checks, the health, when you have to deal with what happens when permission slips, like you mentioned, for camera, those type of things. There is a youth camp manual, but I think what maybe through this initiative is having these camps review this youth camp manual that's out there and provide feedback of what works and what wouldn't work, like I mentioned before. And then both Yakima and San Carlos, they're 40 or 50 miles away from the communities. That's what's interesting between Yakima and San Carlos, they're real similar communities. Yeah, maybe the other thing was, it mentions like regional student exchange, maybe one step beyond these camps, but maybe a second step from these youth, modify the youth camp initiative. Maybe there's a way to have a student exchange. I'd be interested before we break for lunch if there's any other recommendations. In your packet, in your symposium packet, there is a findings and recommendations form that if you think of something else, please write it down and provide feedback for us. I know you're loud enough, Larry. It gets recorded this way.
But I might suggest that the group consider a recommendation that this be used, that this format of workshops on bringing young people into natural resources be considered in the future for ITC symposiums as well, as a permanent part of the agenda.
The youth camp or
The discussion of, excuse me, the discussion of how youth camps play a role, and especially when we get to hear from the people that are doing it, so that we can hear from them and be inspired and hopeful about the future, but also so that they can learn from each other about how best to accomplish this important task.
Hello, my name is Trudy Pinkham, and one of the recommendations I would like to see, I worked on a lot of youth camps as a forestry intern working with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Maybe ITC could look at again recruiting our college students to help as mentors, because it really helps a young student in high school when you work with, I've worked with the Pacific region camps and the Northwest camps that we've had here, to have a mentor. And when you do the national camps, you know, we can either support Sally or in her workshop, or ITC should be also pushing to help Sally build a bigger camp, because at that camp they only have 35 kids that come across nationwide, 5 students from each of the regions from the National Native American Fish and Wildlife Society. ITC, you know, we keep saying we're going to be recruiting, and for the last couple of years I really haven't seen ITC step up to the plate and put a camp together. We have a lot of people that know how to put together camps. Don's one of them as well. He won't admit to it, but
I was 30 years younger too.
so it would be nice to see ITC step up to the plate. You have enough reservations across nationwide where we could be moving this camp all over the place and help fund and help pull these kids into forestry, because my biggest problem at Yakima is trying to get more younger kids into forestry. And I'd like to see ITC step up to the plate and start actively recruiting more high school students. And I haven't seen that happen in the last 20-some years, and I've been a forester for 26 years now, and I'm sad to say for the last 15 I really haven't seen much push for getting Indian kids in the Northwest back into forestry.
Trudy, I'm curious, what was the arrangement 20 years ago?
26 years ago and 30 years ago, as Don was saying, we had a group of the Northwest tribes come together, and I think Don Motendek was one of the leads on those, and they sent representatives from the Forest Service, from the tribes, and we got an application together, we secured funding, plus we used cooperatives with the tribes to ask them to donate money towards the camp. Camp runs about $20,000 back then, and that's for getting the kids to camp. All salaries are in kind, and when you work with the Forest Service, the BLM, Fish and Wildlife Service, all these other federal agencies, you make it part of their training opportunity to come in and help with kids. And you'll believe it, you know, a lot of the government agencies will send their employees to help as chaperones and as mentors to work with the kids all week long. And our little curriculum was kind of based on how to put together a timber sale. So we had kids in wildlife and fisheries and forestry. And it was kind of like, this is how you put together a timber scale. And at the end of the week, all the kids would try to put together how they would do a timber sale. It was really kind of a fun experience for the kids, because we had fish biologists in the groups, we had foresters, we had hydrologists, we had all the disciplines there represented from the tribes, from the different federal agencies. It was a great camp, and you talk about having anywhere from 110 up to 200 high school kids is technically a challenge, but it is doable, because whenever you bring a tribe in, you make sure they have a couple chaperones with them, so you have students that know the students from where they're coming from. You set very strict rules by saying, you know, you lay the rules out. Plus, what we did at Yakima, we said no pop, no candy, no gum. You're here to to help. You know, when it comes to cooking food, you have the different cabins come in and they're helping prepare breakfast, they're helping prepare lunch, they're helping to prepare dinner. We do a great big award ceremony at the last night of the week, where the kids get to have some fun. We'll bring in host drum up and they'll drum for the kids. We'll have a teepee construction thing going. There's just a lot of fun things you can do with kids going into forestry. And sad to say, I haven't seen that happen in almost the last 15 to 20 years now. But it is doable. ITC should step up.
Well, maybe a role, just food for thought, based on Trudy's comments, would be for ITC to facilitate in some manner a discussion between those agencies that used to support that, towards getting them to come forward again with people and funds to support it in the law.
Yeah, because you have all seen the tribal relationship people here, from the Forest Service, from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They're all out there. And part of the tribal relationship and part of their training as federal employees is community involvement, community action, especially in the Native American communities, and all that is in-kind services. So it's not a salary you're going to have to pay, but your employee gets the opportunity to be around a bunch of screening Indian kids, and it is technically challenging, but it is doable.
Yep. One more question. It's lunchtime.
Oh yeah, I'll make it quick. I was just thinking, there's one example that you might consider to involve more kids is at that older level. I'm not saying specifically the salmon camp, but camps in general, forestry and whatnot. And there's a good model actually in Eugene, Oregon, where I think they probably have 1,000 youth every year. And basically they go out and in small groups and they do work. And they contract directly they could contract to a tribe, or to these particular ones contract to the BLM or the Forest Service. And so the kids get a good idea of what production is and what it's like to live and work in the woods. So you kind of, you know, when you get done with that, you know whether or not you might want a career working in the dirt. Thanks.
What Trudy described was Mystic Mountain. There's a camp curriculum called Mystic Mountain where they end up doing an IRMP, Integrated Resource Management Plan, at the end of it. And they do it, I actually, hate to say videotape it, and still around. But anyway, I didn't want to come to this session and end up having to revive this camp. But anyway, can we, I guess, before we break for lunch, appreciate Tana for a round of applause.